Dude wearing linen. Who was he? The answer to this and a whole lot more in another episode of the Bible in 1 Year with the Preacher's Husband. Today, we're going through Ezekiel chapter 9 through 12. Tomorrow, we're going through 13, 14, and 15. So, let's dive into the scriptures. Right off the bat, chapter 9 was extremely intriguing. So, in the first couple of verses, verse 2, it says, I saw 6 men coming from the direction of the upper gate with faces the north, each with a war club in his hand, or a battle axe, depending on your translation. There was another man among them, clothed in linen, carrying riding equipment. They came and stood beside the bronze altar. And then, of course, in verse 3, he called to the man clothed in linen and carrying riding equipment. So the story here goes, this guy, this with this white linen robe on, he was the one that was carrying out, um, I guess, not really the judgment, because it was the six angelic figures that were carrying out the actual vengeance and justice in this chapter. But the one in white was more of the going around marking those for salvation. So let's dig in. We'll talk more about that later. The linen that was often worn by was often worn by angelic messengers in the Bible. We read about that in we'll read about it in Daniel and Revelation later on, but it was also the fabric of priestly types, the Levitical types, or the high priest in particular would wear this kind of linen. Linen thus portrays purity and holiness. Now, this bronze altar that they're talking about originally was built by Solomon in 2 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 1. And it was relocated during the reign of Ahaz to the northeast corner of the temple to make room for his own pagan altar. We read about that in 2 Kings chapter 16. Now, it's possible that those to be spared received the sign of the cross on the forehead, because it's talking about in verses 3 and 4 that basically God told this guy in white linen to put a mark on the forehead of the men who sigh and groan over all the detestable practices that are committed in it. Some people think it was a sign of a cross. Some people in some versions of the Bible say it was the sign of a tau, or the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Others say it's a spiritual mark and that you couldn't have seen it even if you were there. So that's another question for another day. But either way, this is essentially deliverance from judgment is what happened. He goes around, marks these people to deliver them from being judged and from being killed. This kind of resembles a Passover story in a way, where the household was spared if the blood of the sacrificial lamb was placed over the doorway. We read about that in Exodus chapter 12. Then in verse 7, the historical fulfillment of this event, where he fills the courts with the slain, as depicted in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 17 through 19, that we already read. So, with that, we're going to move on to chapter 10, and we'll come back to that linen after a while. Chapter 10, the creatures that are here in the visions of Ezekiel were also in Ezekiel chapter 1, but in chapter 1, Ezekiel didn't name these creatures. But here in chapter 10, he recognizes these creatures to be cherubim, which is a rank of angel. In verse 2, the image of the burned city came true for Jerusalem in 586 BC. We read about that in 2 Kings 25. Verse 3, all the time that the glory of the Lord dwelt in the temple, the cloud that accompanied it to reveal the glory of the Lord filled the court. We saw this during Moses' time. Every time that the Lord appeared, this is what happened when Moses was there and they were dragging the tent around all over the place when they had escaped from slavery in Egypt. Verses 9 through 13, this is kind of a repetition of chapter 1 as well. In chapter 1, verse 18, only the wheels were full of eyes all around, where in this verse here, the creatures, their entirety were full of eyes. The 4 creatures that John saw in Revelation around God's throne were also covered with eyes. We'll read about that later in Revelation chapter 4. And that gets us through chapter 10. There's some interesting imagery here is what I have to say. I put the coals in there because, of course, he asked the one in linen to go and fill his hands with blazing coals from among the cherubim to scatter them over the city. And I'll let you continue the story on that one. We get to chapter 11, verse 1. This verse mentions the same 25 men who had been described earlier in chapter 8, verse 16. We get to verse 7 and 8. Only the slain will be left in Jerusalem. The rest will be taken into exile. And this prophecy in verses 11 and 12 that say, I will judge you at the border of Israel, was literally fulfilled at Riblah in 2 Kings chapter 25, 18 through 21, and also Jeremiah chapter 52, verses 24 through 27. We get into the end where God's glory leaves Jerusalem. So you see the flame and the cloud go away. And then chapter 12, Ezekiel basically dramatizes the entire exile. And these depictions and visuals are pretty interesting. He dramatizes Israel's anxiety. And also there was this deceptive proverb that they talked about that was stopped. So back to these dudes, right? The 6 guys, and of course the man in linen. Who is this guy in linen? It's just interesting to me who this guy is. So let's look at it a little deeper. I looked and did some research on this, and I went into 5 or 6 different commentaries. Some of them were just absolutely ridiculous, and some of them were actually kind of interesting. So anyway, in these commentaries, basically the clothing, as it says here, is his clothing marked his office, and it was distinct from the other 6 angels or angelic beings or men, as it said, because linen characterized a high priest in Leviticus. So this was a symbol of purity, a symbol of leadership. So this garment was assigned to the angel of the Lord in the book of Daniel as well. So who is the angel of the Lord? Well, Daniel named him as Michael. So it could potentially be Michael as this person. The 6 were his subordinates, and he was said to be among them, so in the midst of them. So in either way, he was recognized as their leader. So they all appear to be men at first, but this implies his incarnation as one. So salvation is peculiarly assigned to this guy. So if you think about this from a salvation standpoint, things start getting a little squirrely here. The Jehovah's Witnesses actually believe that Jesus, whose name actually means salvation, that this person was Jesus. This is the only person that can judge is God. And if Jesus was God incarnate, then the only person that can judge who's going to live and who's going to die is Jesus. So here this person in linen was marking those for salvation. It had to be Jesus according to them, right? Well, then they will go on and list all of these different biblical verses that would support that. Same way with the Michael thing. The towel, it was mentioned in one of the books of the Bible, but there was an interesting one that popped up, was this theory about it being the angel Uriel. Now, this angel Uriel is not found in Scripture. It's not found in any of the canonical writings, and only 3 angels are actually named in the Bible, and that's Gabriel, Michael, and Raphael. Yet some Jewish writings refer to 7 archangels, not just 3, but 7. So when they do, Uriel is the 4th, or the next one down. But the name Uriel has various meanings, and it's been attached to various different types of archangels. So some of those meanings are light of God, or fire of God, or flame of God, which would kind of go along with salvation in a way, but more so the vengeance side of things. So I got a little confused on this one, but anyway, Uriel has been variously referred to as the Prince of the Sun, and even the Angel of the Presence, the Archangel of Salvation. So here we are, the Archangel of Salvation. So that's where those folks that feel that maybe this angelic person was Uriel here. And then Isaiah 63 verse 9 also mentions an angel of divine presence, which people say that that could be Uriel. But the problem with all this is that all we know about Uriel comes from legends and tales and angel lore. None of it comes from the Bible. So I don't know. What do you think? My wife seems to lean towards the Moses side of things. I kind of tend to lean towards it's an angel, it possibly Michael, but who knows? Some people say Jesus. Some people say Moses. Some people say Uriel. Some people say Michael. Some people say just another angel that doesn't have a name. We don't know. It could be somebody, some other angel. What do you think? So there you have on your screen a towel and a cross just to kind of contemplate. What do you think that image was that was placed on the forehead as well? Was it a cross? Was it a towel? Or was it something spiritual that you couldn't even see? Lots of questions today. Not really a whole lot of answers from my point of view. What do you think about all this? Well, I hope this has touched you. If it has, click the like button, the subscribe button. Of course, click the little jingle bell so you can get notified the next time I upload a video, which will be tomorrow for another episode of the Bible in 1 Year with the Preacher's Husband. We'll see you then.